Koinant, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And this is another huge shout out to Fiona, and it's her latest article, which is about the role of witch doctors in society. I'm talking about the mainly the Zulu society, and why we talk about witch doctors so much. This will give you a bit of insight if you don't come from South Africa or don't really have your head around what witch doctors do. Okay. One day, when I was about 7 years old, as the Zulus went about their work, there was a flurry of excitement and the buzz of conversation about a Sangoma coming. "What's a Sangoma?" I asked Evelina that evening as she bathed my younger sister and me. "It's the witch doctor," she said, scrubbing at my feet, which were ingrained with dirt from running around barefoot all the time. I squirmed as a nail brush tickled my leathery soles. "We're getting a visit from a Sangoma from Impengele. Somebody has asked one to come here to give them some information. Perhaps they've lost something precious, or they have a problem they want fixed. The Sangoma will throw bones and they will show them what they need to know." "What sort of bones?" "I don't know. It's all to do with the muti." Now, we've talked about muti on this channel a lot. Muti is basically, it's pretty awful stuff. It can be anything from a man's appendage cut off. It can be, we're talking about lions with their paws being cut off. All those sort of things are used as muti by sangomas. Anyway, getting back to the story. "I don't know, it's all about muti." She shuddered involuntarily, although the bathroom was warm and steamy. "We will soon find out, though." "Will I be able to go and see them doing the bone muti?" I persisted, but Evelina wasn't to be drawn any further. She inspected the soles of my feet. She was short-sighted and had to peer at them closely. "Keep still." "Where will the Sangoma stay?" I enjoyed anything new that cropped up in our rather uneventful day-to-day lives, however irrelevant it was to me. "I don't know yet. Perhaps in somebody's hut. The person who has called them. Now jump out so I can dry you." As I lay in bed that night, I recalled a dim, distant memory of a witch doctor that Grandpa had summoned to sort out a stock theft problem he had once, a long time ago, on the small holding he'd moved to at Fort Nottingham, 10 miles away. I must have been about 4 years old, and I remember it was a crisp winter's morning. Although the sun's rays had warmed the farmyard, there was still sparkling white frost lying on the long grass in the shade of the old, dry stone wall that enclosed his fowl run. A cow had mysteriously gone missing from Grandpa's herd, and he had assumed it had been stolen. So he sent word to a local witch doctor to come and find the culprit. My older sister and I stood well back behind him as his 5 farm labourers, summoned from their morning jobs, shuffled nervously to form a line in front of him. They had respectfully removed their faded cotton hats, which they now twisted anxiously in their calloused black hands. Waving his walking stick to indicate the low stone wall, Grandpa told them to sit in a row and keep still. Still wielding his stick expansively to illustrate various points, Grandpa proceeded in his fluent Zulu to tell the little group lined up on the stone wall how he had discovered his cow was missing, and what he was about to find out who had stolen it. Tension built up perceptibly as he carried on describing what he had planned. The men shifted nervously on the wall, showing the whites of their eyes as they glanced at one another, hoping, I suppose, that someone would own up before the ordeal began. Then the witch doctor appeared in full regalia, with feathers and blown-up dried sheep's bladders flapping from his head and body, to stand in front of the group next to my grandfather. Quietly the witch doctor said to Grandpa, "The guilty one will fall off the wall backwards." The arrival of the witch doctor seemed to strike terror into the 5 Zulus, who sat on the stone wall, statue-like, in their ragged overalls and worn gumboots, eyes fixed in front of them like condemned men. The interrogation began in rapid Zulu. during which the witch doctor flung his hand out at the group several times, indicating that he was putting mtagati, a spell on them. He might even have thrown some substance like a powder at them. I don't remember. Suddenly one man plummeted backward off the wall with a frightening yell, landing on his back in the fire run behind him. We all gave a startled jump, especially the men on either side of him. "Guilty," said the witch doctor succinctly. Grandpa was delighted that the money he had spent on the procedure had had such a good outcome, and happily paid the witch doctor his fee. The cattle thief had revealed himself. Grandpa recovered his stolen car, and the whole event served to deter any other would-be cattle thieves. The following morning, I ran off to play with Kupani, the cookwoman's boy. He was 8 and lived with his parents in one of the small round huts up at the kraal. His father was a labourer, and his mother cooked the food for all the single male workers that lived in a long oblong hut called the futu kaya, a sort of dormitory, where they slept and ate. We had been told by both our parents, Mrs. Bannatyne, the farm manager's wife who was supposed to be our governess, and even Evelina, that we were never allowed ever to go anywhere near there, not even to walk along the road that passed in front of the futu kaya. But I had nipped in once anyway, purely out of curiosity, to see what it was so expressly forbidden. It was almost pitch dark and extremely smoky in there, as there were no windows at all, and certainly no chimney, just a small front opening that served as an entrance, with a homemade door propped open. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, all I could see were 2 rows of makeshift wooden beds, each covered in an army blanket and with pillows made from hessian sacking stuffed with hay. The beds were ranged against the long walls, all the legs set in a jam tins, and then propped up on bricks to keep the tokolosh away. I'd long ago asked Evelina and Alicia why they insisted on raising the legs of their beds on bricks. "To keep away the tokolosh," was the emphatic reply. "What's a tokolosh?" I asked. "It's a small, black, mischievous demon that comes out at night when you're asleep and does bad things to you. They can't climb up bricks, though, so that's why we put them under the bed legs." "What sort of bad things?" I persisted, but everyone just pressed their lips together, shook their heads, and changed the subject. Each of the 4 wooden hand-cut legs were placed first in a used tin, some with baked beans or pilchards and tomato sauce labels still on, filled with an unidentifiable liquid, probably paraffin, to keep ants, scorpions, and other creepy crawlies from climbing up into the bed. Those were balanced on the bricks, and then the bed legs in their tins were perched on top. A wood fire burned in a circle of big stones in the middle of the dung floor, and as my eyes began to sting and water from the dense smoke coming off it, I felt something tickling and then biting my ankles, and ran quickly outside again into the bright morning sunlight. Looking down, I saw what appeared to be crawling black socks over my bare feet and ankles. Fleas! Hundreds of them had latched on and were biting my skin. The itching was unbearable, and I fled to the standpipe to run icy cold water over my legs and ankles, frantically scrubbing them off. 6 of the Kaya residents were sitting on a log, backs to the sun-warmed wall of their hut, enjoying their breakfast, a plate of putu scooped from the big black iron 3-leg pot over the fire in front of the doorway. This was one of the 2 daily meals of putu, which Kupani's mother made for them, with a generous dollop of amasi on top. A tin cup of well-brewed coffee was placed carefully on the hard-baked, clean-swept ground next to each man, and they all burst out laughing as I danced and hopped, scraping at the fleas in disgust. "How, Nkosi-san? That's why Nkosi-san and Ndlovu told you never to go in there." And they slapped their thighs and cackled, and shook their heads, wiping away tears of mirth, some of them mimicking my slapping motions with their brown, work-hardened hands. Still chuckling, they eased themselves to their feet as the farm bell rang for them to start their day's work, showing pink gums as they yawned widely. Stretching their arms over their heads and arching their backs, they made their way to collect the pangas, or machetes, for a long morning slog, hacking pungent-smelling bonga-bonga, bugweed, from the riverbanks. Kapani and I each had a dinky car. I'd given him one of mine, and the previous afternoon he had said they needed servicing. He was waiting for me at the workshop, and we both poked around in all the tins and containers on the wooden workbench looking for axle grease. "Nothing here," said Kapani. "We'll have to go and look under the Jeep." He crawled under our old war-issue American Willys Jeep and scraped some black grease off the back axle. "Right, now we must do our cars." We were squatting under the gum trees next to the standpipe up at the huts, in the shade, working grease into our car's axles, when I saw somebody approaching slowly up the path. It was the strangest apparition I'd ever seen in my life. She was a large, middle-aged Zulu woman, and there was nothing uncommon in that. It was that she was wearing that made me stop what I was doing and stare, my mouth open in astonishment. She wore several animal skins, some of which I recognized as those of spotted gannets and banded mongooses, sewn together to make a voluminous, flapping skirt. Over her shoulders she had draped a cape of black-backed jackal skin, long bushy black tail and all, and pinned to her shoulder like a brooch was the head of a recently killed chicken. She wore a bizarre headdress of other strange materials, of which I recognized only one, a python skin. Festooned around her neck and waist were strings onto which she threaded the dried vertebrae of many different small wild animals, seed pods that looked like dried, bloated blue ticks, scarlet carapaces of beetles, ladybirds, and more pieces of snakeskin. She had necklaces of traditional Zulu beads too, but not in any patterns and colours I'd ever seen before. The strangest effect of all was the dried sheep's bladders. They'd blown up about a dozen of them so they looked like grey semi-opaque balloons, and tied them to her headdress and around her upper body and waist. They flapped alarmingly as she walked, and the bones rattled loudly with every movement she made. I stood there gaping at her. "Kopani!" I turned to my friend, but he was gone. He must have bolted into the nearest hut. I stood up to greet this apparition. I may have been slightly apprehensive, but I still had my Zulu manners. I put both hands forward, the right one just behind the left, to koala, or shake hands, as is the custom, and bent my knees in a little bob with my head bowed. "Sawubona," I said. I did not know what title to use to address the stranger, so I left it at "Sawubona Ingwana Wumalungu," greetings, child of a white man. An odd way to describe me, since everybody on and everyone off the farm called me Nkosazana, the chief's daughter. This person obviously didn't know anything about us. She looked imperiously around the surroundings, the cluster of round thatch mud huts in which the farm staff lived. As she turned her head, the sheep's bladders bobbed and her skin rustled with a crackling noise. "Where is everybody?" she asked. I looked around as well and discovered the place was deserted. That was odd. Normally there was lots of activity going on in and around the huts. Children playing, mothers sweeping around the front steps and stirring big pots of putu on the fires that burned constantly in front of their dwellings. There wasn't a soul about. "I'll find somebody," I replied, and ran into Kapani's hut. I suspected I'd find him in there. He was cowering under his parents' bed with just the whites of his eyes visible in the gloom. I noticed that the legs of the beds were also set up on bricks to keep the tokolosh away. "Kapani," I hissed, "what's going on? What are you doing?" "That's the witch doctor," he whispered back, his teeth chattering with fright. "Tell her there's nobody here." I'd never seen him this frightened before. I peered at him closely. His face was beaded with sweat, and his skin had a greyish pallor. Then I remembered what Evelina had said. Somebody called the Sangoma to come here. I said to Kapani in a whisper. I could smell his fear, a pungent, musky, almost polecat-like stink coming off him. "We can't send her away." "I'm not going out there," he hissed emphatically, and I realized that I would have to drag him bodily, probably screaming, out of his bolt hole if I wanted him to deal with the situation. "Stay there then, you coward, and I'll go and call Evelina." I ran back to the oddly dressed woman and asked her politely to wait while I fetched someone, Then I trotted back past the stables and sheds to the house. Evelina was kneeling on a piece of sheepskin in the sitting room, polishing the crystal knob of the door that led to the dining room. "The Sangomas here," I said quietly in her ear. She froze. The soft cloth dropped out of her hand and onto the floor, and her eyes widened, the whites showing as they swiveled around in terror. "Where?" she gasped. I noticed that she too had beads of sweat that suddenly appeared on her brow and top lip, and her skin was going grey like Kapani's. "She's up at the huts," I said. "She's waiting up there, and I can't find anybody. I can't leave my work. Nkosikazi would be very angry. What shall I do?" She remained where she was, still on her knees, a middle-aged mother and probably grandmother, torn between her fear of the witch doctor and that of my mother. "Go and tell Micaiah. He's up at the back chopping firewood. He'll be able to slip away," and go and greet her. I did as I was told, and then stood in the road as I watched Micaiah hurry nervously up the path towards their huts. The Zulus would never have involved me in whatever transpired, and for me the remainder of these proceedings were a closed door. I knew very little about the witchcraft business. Incidents in our daily lives regularly reveal themselves as the work of Umtagati, a witch doctor who casts evil spells. There's also a Sangoma witch doctor who will cast more benign spells. For instance, when we had boiled or fried eggs laid by our hens, and Evelina saw a minute blood clot, as often appears in eggs, she should fuss and very carefully scrape the offending particle out with a spoon. Then she'd go and throw it out of the window very quickly, muttering to herself. Zulus believe that a sign that someone's put a spell on the intended egg-eater. She would have thrown the whole egg away, I know, if she hadn't been so afraid of my mother. Chameleons, too, threw them into a state of sheer terror, and we could achieve some satisfying results by walking casually up to anyone on the farm and suddenly thrusting a hand out to show them a live chameleon clinging there, with its tail wrapped around one of our fingers. If the startled creature opened its mouth to hiss, it showed a bright orange interior where its tongue lay coiled, and this could produce an actual fit among the women. "It'll bite you and you'll die," they pleaded. I have to add to this. I grew up in Tanzania, and I had a pet chameleon. Had it for a long, long time, and it used to sit on my shoulder. And when I wanted to have some fun, I would walk down to Iringa, to the marketplace, and crowded, thousands of Africans shopping, moving around, and, general hubbub. I would just walk into that market, and they would look and they would see the chameleon and go, "How, how, how," and they would run the other way. It was like Moses clearing the water. He just walked straight through, and they just ran the other way. It was quite incredible. Yeah, so the power of the chameleon on the shoulder is something to behold in Africa. Getting back to the story here, Fiona says, Umnwabu, or chameleon, is venomous. Frogs and toads produce a similar reaction, although not quite as dramatic. Zulus believe that chameleons, toads and frogs are all as deadly as snakes, if not more so. The Zulus believe implicitly that they carry venom and can strike just like any snake. The latter, on the other hand, caused an excited shout of "Inyokai," or snake, whenever one was seen slithering around or lying in wait, as puff adders do, and everyone gathered around to kill it. Finally, an argument usually arose as to who would claim it as theirs to use for muti. It seems that one could apply snake fat and the oil to one's joints to reduce pains and arthritis, and that qualified as medicine, but without the terror associated with witchcraft. After the 1994 election, the new black ANC council was to be sworn in at the City Hall in Pietermaritzburg. The hall is a magnificent, beautifully appointed Victorian triple-storey edifice made entirely out of brick, and at that time was known as the tallest brick building in the Southern Hemisphere. The massive double yellow wood doors had big brass handles, and all the councillors, both black and white, gathered around the new black bailiff to open them to start the ceremony. Suddenly he gave a shout and jumped back, shouting, Umtagati! He had seen some substance on the door handles, probably extra furniture polish left there by an over-enthusiastic cleaner. All the proceedings ground to a halt as the black councillors refused to go anywhere near the doors. A witch doctor had to be summoned from somewhere to come and remove the spell. This took a long time, as it was before cell phones, and the prospective witch doctor lived way out in Edendale, the location nearest the capital city. An hour and a half later, the witch doctor eventually arrived in a taxi. He was dressed up in all the regalia I've described before, and came rattling and flapping his way through the building. As he passed through, every black cleaner and bystander shrank away from him in terror, and some hid behind pillars or in the offices. He proceeded to mutter some incantations, pulled some pink powder from a pouch he had hidden somewhere about his person, and then proclaimed loudly that he had removed the spell and wanted to be paid. That was the end of the problem. All the councillors trooped in to begin the swearing-in ceremony, but this was the first time the white councillors, mostly Liberals and members of the PFP party, packed for Perth, as we dubbed them, had encountered Africans in this manner. None of our city friends could speak a word of Zulu, although they had plenty of black servants. The only Africans they had ever had face-to-face business with were said servants. Criminals standing in the dock meekly trying to look innocent, subservient black delivery people, and so on. In all these encounters they had only seen Africans as downtrodden and suppressed, innocent black-skinned human beings who were just the wrong colour, and who had been treated so abominably by the Afrikaner government. They couldn't wait to vote. Even though greatly outnumbered by the ANC, they wanted equality for everyone through democracy. Then all those who could emigrate left the country very soon afterwards. Unlike us, they had never come across drunk, belligerent black men with knobkerries and sticks, lashing up blindly at one another, or whites who had tried to subdue them before they murdered someone, as all white farmers had to from time to time. Not only could they be drunk and very aggressive, on some farms the African women brewed shimian, a moonshine type of liquor, which contains battery acid, dead rats and other such delights, and which poisoned many people who drank it. Shimian mixed with dacha, or cannabis, which grows wild like nettles do in the UK, was now rife in the urban areas, and the black people who imbibed in this could go absolutely mad and attack and kill everybody around them. On the farm, very occasionally, Ngidi would report to Dad that one of the women was brewing shimian, and she would be dismissed immediately. She and her husband and entire family would have to leave the kraal and go back to Impengele. Okay, so there you go. That's a little bit about witch doctors. Yeah, and it's absolutely true, the fear the Zulu people have of the power of the witch doctor. And of course, the witch doctors, or sangomas, are going to be official medical health practitioners under the National Health Insurance Scheme. God help South Africa. All right, guys, please remember to subscribe to be kept informed. Ring the bell for the updates. Please like this video. Please share this video. And above all, please stay safe.